If you became president or senator or a representative in the House of Representatives, what would influence you as a leader? Would it maybe be a really good book that you've read, or perhaps some wise wisdom that you may have heard from someone who you hold dear? Well, in today's lesson, we're going to be exploring how did ancient Chinese philosophies influence the government and society. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, the goal for this lesson is to learn about changes in ancient Chinese government and society. Now, in order to meet that goal, we first need to explain how geography affected the development of Chinese civilization. Secondly, we need to explain the influence of Confucianism and legalism on Chinese society and government. And finally, the third thing we need to do is describe the advancements made during Chinese dynasties. Now, throughout this lesson, I want you to keep your eyes open for these words to know. Your academic word is bureaucracy. And these final ones, these are your domain-specific or your lesson-specific words. Those are Confucianism, filial piety, legalism. This word is pronounced less, and mandate of heaven. Make sure you keep your eyes out for these words as we go through this lesson. Take a look at that lesson question, scholars. Top of the screen, it says, how did ancient Chinese philosophies influence government and society? Well, in order to answer that question, we first need to look at early civilization in ancient China and also look at the geography of ancient China as well. Secondly, we need to look at the Zhou and the Qin dynasties. And third, building on those dynasties, we need to finally look at the Han Dynasty. And by looking at all three of these different parts, we'll definitely be able to answer our lesson question. Before we look at the Chinese geography and the ancient Chinese empires, let's look at the river valley civilizations as a whole. Now you can see over here is the Huanghe River Valley. You have the Indus River Valley right here. You have Mesopotamia between the Euphrates and the Tigris. And finally, you have the Nile River, where ancient Egypt was located and modern-day Egypt is located as well. But for this lesson, we're going to be focusing on the Huanghe River Valley. But what ties all of these different regions together, the Huanghe, the Indus, the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Nile, all of these together is exactly what I just named. The river. The rivers tie all of these civilizations together because these freshwater rivers allow for the creation and the growth of a surplus of crops. That surplus of crops will support settlements, and those settlements will grow larger, and from those settlements will develop the first civilizations. All right, scholars, let's take a look at that lesson question one more time. It's at the top of the screen. It says, how did ancient Chinese philosophies influence government and society? Well, in this first part, we're going to look at early civilization, and we're really going to focus on filial piety. And we're also going to be looking at the geography in ancient China as well. Let's go ahead and get started with this first part. Chinese civilization developed along the Huanghe River Valley as early as 5000 BCE. Here's the Huanghe River Valley on the map here. Now, the river was named after the yellow silt it deposited, called less. But floods along the river could be helpful because it would deposit that less, which would be very rich in nutrients and allow for the growth and the surplus of food. But they could also be very devastating. Obviously, a flood could come along and wipe out towns, but what made it different and especially devastating is that the Huanghe River, it did not flood annually like the Nile did, so they couldn't predict it. And so it would just flood suddenly, and that could be very devastating. But again, one reason why it was helpful was because fertile soil surrounded the river valley and allowed for the growth of crops, which led to the surplus of food and allowed for the creation of the first ever civilizations, or dynasties, in China. Now, the first Chinese dynasty was the Xia, which you can see spelled out right here. But there are no written records from this dynasty, so we don't know a great deal about it. One dynasty we know much more about is the Shang Dynasty, which began around 1600 BCE. You can see an example of some of their artifacts that we have been able to find. Now, the Shang Dynasty One, they built advanced settlements. Two, they were governed by a ruling warrior class and headed by a king, so they had a centralized government. And three, they used bronze to make weapons and silk to make cloth. And silk was very desirable, so that really helped with trade. The key thing about the Shang Dynasty is that they had a number of achievements just like previous civilizations you may have seen throughout this course. One key thing that came out of the Shang Dynasty was Chinese writing, which, like we said, was developed during the Shang Dynasty. Now, the earliest records date back to around 1200 BCE, and you can see an example of some Chinese characters on the screen right here. Now, this Chinese writing, it spread to Japan around 400 CE. But the key thing to realize about this writing is that it has no relationship between spoken Chinese. Let me give you an example. If you do not speak French, or if you don't speak Spanish, or you speak English, or you speak these different languages, if you go to France and you see this, this is the same in France as it is in England, as it is in Portugal, as it is in Germany. 3 + 3 = 6. It doesn't matter what language you can speak, you'll be able to understand that. However, if you write out the actual 3 + 3 = 6, if you write it all out word for word, if you speak French and not English, you may not understand that. But in Chinese writing, again, there's no relationship. So it doesn't matter what language you speak, all the languages, the writing is the same. And that really helped unify China, because even if you didn't speak the same language, you would be able to still communicate with its writing. In addition to writing, you begin to see the origins of Chinese culture, where at the core, at the center of Chinese culture, was family. And in addition to that, the idea of filial piety, or the respect for one's elders, was a very important trait, and it still is in Chinese society to this very day. There was also a belief system centered on paying respect to the ancestors. Now, the ancestors in ancient Chinese society, they were not viewed as gods. However, it was believed that ancestors could impact present events, and you may have an ancestor that could hurt present events, or it could help present events. But the big takeaway here is this idea of filial piety in Chinese culture that began during this time period, you can still see playing a very key role in Chinese society today. Look at that, scholars. You finished the first part of the lesson, on to the second. I knew you could do it. But before we move on to lucky number 3, take a look at that lesson question. Top of the screen, it says, how did ancient Chinese philosophies influence government and, you guessed it, society? Well, to begin answering that question, we've first got to make sure we take a look at early civilization. Recall talking about the early civilizations in ancient China. They developed along the Huanghe River Valley, and those civilizations gradually led to these dynasties that we're taking a look at today. Now, in this next part, or the second part, we're going to look at the beginning of the Zhou as well as the Qin dynasties, and we're going to see how they utilized the mandate of heaven as well as legalism, and we'll see how these two philosophies really influenced government and society in ancient China. Let's get started with this second part, scholars. After the Shang Dynasty, the Zhou Dynasty successfully overthrew them. Well, overthrowing your elders is obviously a violation of filial piety. You're not showing respect to them. So, in order to reconcile this, the Zhou introduced the mandate of heaven. Let's take a look at what that is. One, it says that the right to rule came from heaven. And it goes on to say that the heavens would bring blessings or good things to a just and a moral ruler. So if you were a good ruler, you'd have a surplus of food, you would be victorious in combat, etc. However, if you were a bad ruler or lacked virtue, Floods, corruption, and famine were all signs that the ruler had lost his mandate. And if he had lost his mandate of heaven, that ruler was no longer fit to be a ruler and would be replaced. That's what the mandate of heaven is. But let's dig a little bit deeper, and I want to show you a strategy right here. And this is analyzing a primary source, and what we're going to do is identify the main idea in this primary source. Now, whenever you get a primary source document, right over here on the right, or an artifact, something like this, there are a couple things I really want you to do, certain steps, always. The first step is to look at the background information. It's right over here on the left side. Here's the background information. Let's read it together. It says, this passage comes from the Book of History, a collection of documents commenting on Chinese society. And in this paragraph, a government minister is writing to give advice to a young king. All right? Good background information. The next thing you need to do after the background information is find the date. You see the date on this page? Well, it's right over here. Here's the date. It says CA, or circa. Around 650 BCE is when this was written. Next, you need to find the author. But usually the author is right here. I don't see an author. Oh, but wait. Remember that background information? That's where you've got to look at it, because look right here. It tells you it was a government minister who's writing to give advice to a young king. So you've got the author. Now I want to look at the primary source right now, and I really want you to focus on cause and effect. Or if you do this, what will be the effect? Let's read it together. Right up here. The ways of heaven are certain. On those who are virtuous, it sends down all blessings. And on the evildoer, it sends down all miseries. If you are a good ruler, all the regions of the empire will be happy and rejoice. If you rule badly, this will bring dishonor on your ancestors and ruin your empire. Did you see the cause and effect? Well, he's saying if you are virtuous, you will receive blessings. If you're good, the effect will be blessings. But if you are an evildoer, if you are bad, it will send down miseries, cause and effect. And he goes on to keep on doing that. If you are a good ruler, your empire will be happy and rejoice, cause and effect. And again, he makes the same point about the opposite idea, is that if you rule badly, it will bring dishonor to your ancestors, which was huge, because remember, ancestors, they believed, could influence modern events, and it will bring ruin to your empire. So just make sure you keep those steps in mind as you're dissecting or analyzing a primary source document. During the Zhou period, there were many advancements. Let's take a look at some of them. One is that they introduced the use of iron for weapons and tools. The big significant fact about this is that they made both much stronger and much more efficient. In addition, they built roads, canals, and the result of this was trade. Increased trade brought much prosperity to the period. Now, to help with that prosperity, they minted coins. Some of them you can see on the right. Now, these coins would allow the exchange of goods and the exchange of services much easier with a uniformed form of currency. Imagine in the United States if we had 50 different currencies for 50 states. That's why we have one currency. And the same is true during the Zhou period. However, the Zhou influence gradually waned, and as it waned and collapsed, China descended into a warring states period. And during this period, noble families began fighting over land as well as resources. Now, kings lost all power, law and order was declined, and traditional values were rejected during this warring states period. Some of those traditional values were virtue, order, respect. All of them declined. Well, realizing this decline, there was Confucius. Now, he was considered one of China's most famous teacher and its famous philosopher. And he became a minister of justice. Now, a story goes is that he was so just as a minister, and he got his town so righteous, or had so much virtue, that it was said that a bag of money could be left in the middle of the road and no one would touch it until the actual person who dropped that bag of money would come by and find it. Or so the story says. Now, Confucius, he believed that an orderly society should be organized around certain rules of behavior. Let's take a look at some of those. These are the tenets of Confucianism. The first is on good relationships. Now, what he's talking about here is that 5 different relationships, each with certain rules and behavior. The second tenet of Confucianism was virtuous behavior, and you should practice kindness, goodness, and filial piety. You recall what that means? Well, that's to respect one's elders. Because remember, during the Warring States period, all of this is breaking down, so he's trying to bring it back. Now, the final tenet of Confucianism was education. And he said that education was essential for individuals as well as society. So you can see the Warring States period came, and all of these things had been lacking, and Confucianism was trying to bring them back. However, not everyone agreed with Confucianism. In fact, the antithesis, or the opposite of Confucianism, was legalism. Now, what legalism said is that a powerful government was needed for a peaceful and orderly society, and that government should use strict laws to enforce good behavior, and that all people were subject to the same laws, and that those who disobey the law should be punished harshly. And the ideas and ways of thinking should be strictly controlled by the government. What this is basically saying, what legalism argued or said, is that people are generally bad. They are selfish. They are not good. But Confucianism argued that people are good naturally. So you can see that legalism and Confucianism, they were opposites, and they were both competing philosophies in the government as well as in Chinese society. The Warring States period in China lasted only until Qin Shihuangdi, who you see on the right, came to power. And he proclaimed himself the first sovereign empire. Now, he took out the Warring States period and he established the Qin Dynasty. Now, instead of choosing Confucianism as his philosophy, he embraced legalism, and he organized a very strict system of laws to regulate the people under his rule. Now, part of his regulating is that he ordered all noble families to live in the capital. You may ask yourself, well, why would you want to just cram the capital? Well, during the Warring States period, recall that during this period, the noble families all fractured and they were all fighting each other. Well, if Qin Shihuangdi consolidates them all and forces them all to live in one place, and he's in that place, he can keep an eye on all of those noble families. Now, Qin Shihuangdi, he had a number of achievements, and the Qin Dynasty had a number of achievements too. For one, they started the construction of the Great Wall. You can see that to the right of the screen. Now, he built an extensive network of roads as well as irrigation systems. In addition, he standardized currency, weights, as well as measures. This was critical for trade because you had a uniform currency. 1 pound was 1 pound was 1 pound. It wasn't a pound here. Maybe 1 pound of rice is actually 30 pounds over here. It's maybe 0.5 pounds here. One standard unit would really help facilitate equal trade. He also increased trade, like we just said, as well as agricultural production. However, after the death of Qin Shihuangdi, the Qin Dynasty, without his charisma and without his dynamic leadership, collapsed. Wonderful work, scholars. We're on to the last part. But before we move on to the last part, let's take a look at that lesson question, which is at the top of the screen. It says, how did ancient Chinese philosophies influence government and society? Well, recall in the first part, we looked at the Shang Dynasty, how they embraced filial piety, the respect for one's elders, and that had a huge influence on the society. Going to the second part, we looked at the Zhou and the Qin dynasties, and we looked how the Qin dynasty adapted the idea of legalism, and that had a very large influence on the government in ancient China. Now, this last part is going to focus on the Han Dynasty, and we're going to see how they chose Confucianism, and this philosophy would have a huge influence on the government as well as the society. After the Qin Dynasty collapsed, civil war broke out throughout China, and it was chaos until the Han Dynasty emerged following the civil war in 206 BCE, or 206 years before the year 0. Now, this empire was founded by Liu Bang, and Liu Bang, he abandoned legalism. Now, that was critical to gaining support of the people because legalism was very unpopular amongst the people. Recall, it said that all people were basically bad and they needed a strict government with harsh penalties to keep them in order. Now, under his great-grandson, the emperor would expand, and Liu Bang's great-grandson was Emperor Wudi. But before we talk about Emperor Wudi, I want you to take a look at this map right here, where in the dark orange you see the Han Dynasty, which is all this area here. But what I really want you to draw, what I want to draw your attention to is this green line, this Silk Road that linked China all the way with Central Asia, with India, with Europe, with the Middle East, with Africa. Goods were flowing back and forth, and that was critical, and the trade was critical for the prosperity of the emperor. Now, let's talk about that emperor. Emperor Wudi, who you see right here, he expanded the Chinese empire through war. However, he also increased trade, like we talked about, that Silk Road, trade back and forth. Now, because the empire was so large, he needed a good way to maintain it, just like Darius I did, who had a huge empire. To help him maintain or to keep his empire in line, he expanded the size of the Chinese government. And he actually established a complex bureaucracy. But he based his bureaucracy not on legalism, but on Confucian ideas. Now, what he did to help with these ideas is that he increased the number of civil service positions to more than 100,000 people, so greatly increased the amount of people working for the government. He created schools to train people on those Confucian ideas. So you can see this philosophy really influenced the government. He also established an examination system for employees. Now, this was critical because it didn't matter if you were rich or if you were poor. If you did well on this exam, you could get a very lucrative position in the Chinese government, and that was very sought after. However, even if you didn't get that lucrative position, all peasants were still required to work for the government 1 month per year. And what was stressed was the idea of a virtuous person. That is what the government wanted in ancient China. However, with the trade that was going on, and as that trade increased during the Han Empire, the emperor, he began to worry about losing that Chinese culture, that so many other influences would make their way into China, and Chinese influences would go out, and so forth, and there would be a mixing. Well, to keep the Chinese culture a core, he did a couple things. One, he revived Chinese literature, especially poetry. 2, he documented everything from religion to music, and the way he documented it is by introducing paper making. You can see some ancient Chinese paper to the right of the screen, so now you could keep records. In addition, he also protected the secret of silk making, which was very sought after throughout the world. So you can see that the influence of Confucianism during the Han Dynasty was very influential in the Chinese government of the Han Dynasty. Now remember, scholars, a key thing that historians will create to give a graphic representation of what they're studying is a timeline. So here's a timeline of Chinese development. You can obviously see clearly that the Shang Dynasty came first, followed by the Zhou, and then followed by the Han. There was also the Qin Dynasty for a slight bit as well. But let's take a step back and compare it to what was going on in Egypt, where you see during the Shang Dynasty, the Egyptian New Kingdom also existed. But the thing that made all of these similar, whether it be the Shang Dynasty or the Egyptian New Kingdom, was the fact that they all developed around a river, because that river allowed for the surplus of food, and that surplus would support a kingdom, or it would support a dynasty.